The first sail, Norfolk, 1967-1968. He's on mid-watch fatigue and diner coffee, staring at a ledger that won't balance and a life that won't slow down. John Walker has a failing bar, creditors circling, and a new promotion that buys respect but not relief. He also has something else, knowledge of when the Navy's heartbeat ticks and the keys that make that heartbeat unreadable. One night in late '67, he stops pretending there's another answer. He drives north with a single card tucked flat against his chest, a month's key list that could turn noise into orders. The embassy door is heavier than it looks. He tells himself he's just testing the water. A receptionist, a corridor, then a quiet office where a man with patient eyes asks to see the sample. Walker slides the card across and feels his own hand shake. The man barely glances at it before he asks price. Walker names a number that sounds big to him. It isn't big to them. They pay, and they don't haggle about the next time. He leaves with cash that smells like a solution and instructions that smell like permanence. Back in Norfolk, he's still the unflappable warrant officer. He runs the comm center. He signs logs. He jokes in the break room. Meanwhile, he learns a new craft. The case officer in Washington, Yuri Linkov, starts building muscle around a new source. Safe signals, pre-arranged calls, a list of parks, cul-de-sacs, and roadside markers that will become their map. Dead drops instead of face-to-face. Film canisters for pages, rubber-banded cash for performance. Another layer above them, Oleg Kalugin, keeps the leash short and the source hungry. Walker tests what they'll buy, not just keys. Routing indicators, precedence formats, the broadcast schedules that structure a fleet's day. He scribbles down procedures that would seem meaningless to anyone not sitting at the cipher machines, then photographs the pages that will teach Moscow how to think like a US communicator. He brings maintenance manuals and quick reference cards, anything that translates system into habit. The KGB wants habits most of all. The first real handoff is a pile, not a token. A grocery bag under a bench outside a department store in Northern Virginia. Inside, key cards, indicator guides, samples of formatted messages. He does it like they rehearsed. Drive past, loop again, park with casual purpose, walk, bend, go. Within hours, a report rides the cable back to Moscow. The material is genuine. The test is simple. Apply the key list against previously recorded traffic. The letters make sense. The headers align. For the first time, a month's worth of American naval broadcasts become readable text on a Soviet desk. That success is a hunger machine. The next lists have to come on time. The cash comes on time too, and pretty soon the bar's debts disappear without the bar improving. He buys things that announce comfort and calls it savvy. He tells himself it's ideological clarity, then tells himself it's survival. He tries on both stories until one fits on any given day. The truth is simpler. This is easy money for a man with master keys. Inside the comm center, he refines his access. The safe's open because he has the signature. The two-person rule bends because he's the person you call when the circuit hiccups. You think you know how trust works. Rank, competence, reputation. But wait, here's the twist. Those same traits became his camouflage. He photographs pages in back rooms and in his car with a kit the KGB provided. Minox camera, film, a cheat sheet on how to beat glare. He practices with blank paper until the angles look perfect, then does it live. He learns to love the soundless click. On the Soviet side, analysts fuse the gift with what they already have. Direction-finding bearings, logs from trawlers shadowing US exercises, sonar notes passed by Warsaw Pact friends. The decrypts aren't complete. They don't need to be. Even partial reads on precedence and routing tell tempo. A sudden uptick in flash messages tells readiness. A change in broadcast format hints at an exercise start. The picture brightens just enough to feel confident, and confidence is its own weapon. Walker feels that too. He understands that his desk can't feed this beast forever. He needs more sources. He scans his world for people like him, trusted, bored by rules, awash in access. He thinks about a friend who knows circuits inside out and rides the submarine tender that touches everything in the Atlantic. He files the thought away like a radio frequency he'll come back to. For now, he keeps the pipeline open with regularity. Keys by schedule, procedures by the stack, and those dull annexes that, in Moscow, glow. There are brushes with risk. Barbara notices the cache and asks the right questions. He lies, then laughs it off, then lies again. She finds something in a desk she shouldn't see, a card with numbers that mean nothing to her and everything to him. He minimizes. He promises. He brings her along for a drive to clear a site, making espionage look like errands. She carries that unease for years. The FBI will hear it twice before they can hear it. And as the personal tension builds at home, the professional damage scales at work. By 1968, the arrangement feels stable and dangerously easy. He's now feeding a sauce that will run into the 1980s, long enough for habits to harden on both sides. He's still promoted, still praised, and still pouring Navy secrets into a bag beside a highway. In Moscow, a light on a wall chart stays green. In Norfolk, a warrant officer sleeps better because the mortgage is paid. Somewhere between those two rooms, a nation's assumption hardens into a mistake. Walker thinks he's solved his problem. He's created one the Navy won't even see, yet. Turning COMSEC into a weapon. Walker didn't just sell keys. He sold the playbook for how the Navy breathes. Keys for KL7 and KW7 were the opening move. The win was context, procedures, formats, and schedules that turned encryption into a predictable rhythm. He photographed maintenance manuals, alignment guides, troubleshooting trees, and the quick reference cards taped near machines. Dry pages, critical effect. If you know how operators load and change keys, you know when they pause, switch, and repeat. If you know the broadcast cadence, you know when to listen hardest. He fed Moscow the connective tissue, routing indicators that map who's talking to whom, precedence codes that reveal urgency, broadcast formats that keep submarines synced, opaque unless the keys are in hand. With key lists plus those templates, they didn't need to break ciphers. They read and then correlated. He layered the when onto the how, operating schedules from COMSEC and tenders, OTAR notes that spelled out over-the-air rekey rituals, broadcast plan annexes listing primary and backup circuits, and distribution lists showing which unit sat on which guard channel. The invisible wiring of a global system became visible on a foreign desk. Those pages plugged straight into Soviet ears already out there. DF sites pulled bearings. Trawlers logged signal strength and time. Subs wrote sonar diaries, noise spikes, screw signatures, contact patterns, put readable headers next to those logs and patterns sharpened. A flash spike near the GIUK gap, a format change before a carrier workup. Not magic, fusion. For crews, the stakes were quiet and constant. An SSBN captain adjusted depth to catch the evening broadcast, trusting cipher and procedure. Across the world, an analyst underlined the same traffic's precedence marks. A tender's key distribution note suggested which boats had rotated and when they'd next need com windows. Posture changed on 100 small lines that now spoke. Walker turned his knowledge into a shopping list for others. Fresh keys across squadrons, current maintenance notes, distribution logs, sign-out sheets, bureaucracy as roadmap. After the USS Pueblo capture in 1968, KW7 was known to be at risk, so keys rotated fast. Walker beat the fix by supplying future key lists. The cipher wasn't cracked, the calendar was. And as OTAR spread, knowing rekey windows and fallbacks turned recovery into opportunity. Inside Soviet Naval Intelligence, guessing gave way to confidence. They nudged to test reads, edge closer to a suspected patrol lane, time an exercise to a US deployment implied by tempo, then watch the reaction. When behavior matched the decrypt-derived model, certainty hardened. Walker sensed the leverage and started annotating, arrows explaining which routing indicators mattered, which precedence shifts marked a drill versus a surge. He was teaching Moscow to think like a US communicator. The praise came with a leash, keys on schedule, deviations explained. He was on their clock. At sea, nothing looked different. Two-person integrity was ink on the wall, bent by tempo and trust. The circuits stayed up. The export business rode in his trunk. That's the crack in the myth. The silent service isn't invisible if the message layer goes translucent. Perfect radio discipline won't save you if the system that tells you when to listen is compromised upstream. Patrol areas aren't drawn on a map in Moscow. They're inferred from readable rhythms and confirmed by expected signals appearing or not at expected times. The sub doesn't glow. The pattern does. Scale demanded help. Walker set his sights on someone who touched keys from every platform crossing the Atlantic, a tender radioman sitting astride the rivers of paper. His private pipeline was about to become a network. In Moscow, the appetite only grew. That's the turn from a source to a ring. The ring expands, Whitworth and the brothers. He starts with the easy pick, Jerry Whitworth, a radioman who treats procedures like scripture. Walker flatters him, keeps the pitch practical. You handle the paper, photograph it, you never meet anyone. Keys, distribution logs, broadcast annexes, maintenance bulletins. What Whitworth already touches turns into cash. One test run, one fat envelope. It's real. Whitworth becomes the goldmine. On the tender, everything funnels through his hands. Rotating squadrons, surging exercises, keys that keep the Atlantic fed. He copies clean, keeps his job spotless, upgrades his camera for hobbies, and settles into the ritual. Unlock, align the Minox, click, return. The paper never seems to leave his custody. The guilt never has time to form. Walker widens the circle by blood. Arthur, the older brother in defense contracting, feeds specs, manuals, and process write-ups. Peripheral to COMSEC, essential to context. It fills the gaps. How the Navy builds and fixes the things that carry the keys. Then the son. Michael is young, enlisted, and hungry for approval. At home, chores turn into classified errands. At sea, he learns habits and shorthand. He passes forms and small scraps that tell more than he realizes. He carries the burden without the frame. Tradecraft stays ordinary on purpose. Dead drops named for street corners and playgrounds, payphones for signals, film canisters inside tennis ball cans, grocery bags by a pole. Barbara rides shotgun while Walker checks sights, her unease brushed aside with jokes. Control binds the ring. Walker dangles cash and pressure in equal measure, praise for Whitworth's perfection, reminders to Arthur, expectations for Michael. Ideology 1 week, necessity the next. What keeps them moving is simpler. He turns their access into routine, and routine turns into dependence. With the network humming, the question becomes, what could the other side actually see? Moscow is ecstatic but disciplined. Keys on time, maintenance lists by series, distribution logs that show gaps. Bonuses, tighter windows, fewer meetings. One warning never changes. Family is the weak link. Success leaves footprints. Whitworth's camera gets busiest before major exercises. Cash appears, toys follow. A colleague notices and shrugs it off. Barbara's suspicions harden. A night drive, a bag under a tree. On paper, the ring looks clean. No meetings, no chatter. In practice, the volume creates a rhythm analysts can chart. The pattern becomes a question. The question starts the hunt. What the Soviets could see. Start with a desk in Moscow, not a periscope at sea. A clerk rolls out a strip of decrypted broadcast, the kind Walker made readable. The first line isn't a revelation, it's a routing indicator. But paired with yesterday's indicator and last week's precedence shift, it sketches a rhythm. A destroyer squadron gets more traffic than usual. A tender receives a resupply notice. A submarine group's guard channel shifts at midnight. None of it screams location. Together, it whispers temper. They build a wall map of rhythms. Decrypted indicators tag ships to circuits, circuits to commands, commands to expected moves. A routine maintenance dispatch for a ballistic missile submarine's communications suite doesn't say patrol box, but it says the boat's been in port within a window. Cross it with sonar logs and DF bearings, and a likely route emerges. The analysts don't claim omniscience. They write probability, then test it with action. Meanwhile, at sea, an SSBN captain rides the evening broadcast and adjusts for the next update. Across the ocean, a Soviet watch officer sees the same precedence bump and nudges a hunter-killer boat a few miles closer to a suspected lane. Not to chase, to listen. If the American stays silent where expected, confidence rises. Carrier groups felt a version of this too. Density spikes, format shifts, and tender distribution surges signaled busy days. Soviet aviation widened patrol arcs accordingly, then corrected models when reality disagreed. Logistics and habit read as tempo. The details mattered in the margins. Com window changes that hinted at received depth, maintenance notes that implied rotations, distribution lists that showed who was inside the tent. Readable headers turned an internal clock into a metronome the Soviets could hear. A microscene tells it cleanly. A US skipper catches a fleeting contact, changes course to protect schedule. In Moscow, a green bulb on a chart, fed by patterns and a DF bearing, stays lit. No surge, just a plan to be nearby at the next likely com window, not a chase, a wait. Convoys and carriers saw diluted pressure. Tempo informs plans. If you know when keys roll, when circuits swap primaries, and when precedence spikes before exercises, you guess the week, sometimes the day, when activity peaks. Soviet boats and trawlers learned to be accidentally present, building safer trails and better acoustic libraries. Strategic planners leaned on the confidence. Survivability became conditional, not sacred. They didn't claim they could find every SSBN. They argued they could reduce doubt in some seas at some times. Narrower search boxes, better timed patrols, and emissions timed to hide inside American com windows, all cheaper when the rhythm is readable. Inside the US, anomalies flickered. Soviet arrivals near patrol areas more often than models predicted. Shadowers with uncanny timing, DF sites hearing them listen when Americans likely received. Each piece had a tidy explanation: luck, training, tech. A deep compromise didn't fit a culture that trusted its ciphers and custodians. Even with Walker's keys, they didn't read everything always. Keys changed, procedures tightened and slackened, but the floor shifted. Where the Navy assumed opacity, the enemy had windows, sometimes small, sometimes wide. A line from an after-action memory captured it. They were there when we would have been there. The horror wasn't a chase, it was anticipation of rituals. A submarine receives silently, but reception has times, depths, behaviors. Read the ritual, predict the dance. Analysts sensed pattern, not names. They tweaked doctrine and schedules and wrote emissions memos, none of which touched a key list in a Moscow safe. The leak wasn't in antennas, it was in paper. That was the cliff. The Navy felt something off but couldn't point at a person. The Soviets, buoyed by readable rhythms, pushed just enough to keep learning. And the ring kept feeding them the one thing you can't get from a periscope, the story behind the signals. Which makes the missed chances and ignored warnings feel even sharper. Near misses and ignored warnings. Here's the part that stings. People did notice. They just didn't connect the noticing to treason. Audits skimmed the surface. Inspectors logged small COMSEC lapses, open safes, sloppy initials, light burn bags, but treated them as housekeeping. Walker's competence and rank camouflaged him. He was the fixer at 3 a.m., not the suspect at noon. The checklists caught mess, not malice. Barbara's warnings formed a single, clean arc. She found a key card, rode along on a night sight check, and later, during divorce, called the FBI when Cash and a son in uniform made her fear precise. Early reports were filed and forgotten. Years on, she returned with the same story: Russians, night drops, unexplained money, and finally reached someone willing to cross-check. Her signal was steady. The receivers weren't tuned. Elsewhere, Whitworth's odd habits hummed in the background. A camera at odd hours. Cash that didn't match rank. Immaculate logs nobody asked for. It whispered off, not spy. A note went in a file, no case opened. Institutionally, trust ran on reputation. Two-person rules bent under tempo. Pouches moved solo because missions couldn't wait. In that culture, Walker's reliability was its own shield. You don't red flag the person who keeps you from missing the broadcast. Signals intelligence flickered too. Analysts noticed uncanny Soviet timing and wrote memos. The fixes came back procedural: tighter emissions, better destruction, adjusted broadcast windows. Good steps if the enemy didn't already have the keys. The unthinkable stayed unspoken. Future key lists might be compromised. Whitworth, fraying, wrote anonymous RUS letters to the FBI, hints about keys and distribution, a plea for immunity before confession. Too vague to act on, too specific to ignore. They landed in drawers, not taskings. Meanwhile, Walker hid in plain sight. Retired, then a Virginia Beach pie fronting Counterspy, Inc., lecturing sailors on insider threats while expanding his ring. The lesson was right. The messenger was wrong. Normalcy beat suspicion. A small foreign tip finally cracked the mood. An American document in the wrong place abroad. Not enough to name a thief, enough to say the problem might be inside the walls. Ears primed. The next tip wouldn't hit foam. Pressure at home and flickers in the field were about to collide. The tipping point: divorce, debt, and desperation. The house is quiet in the wrong way. Barbara's done being hushed. Years of whispers and night drives harden into lines in a lawyer's office. She wants out and leverage. She knows enough to be dangerous. The bag under a tree, the word Russians said without flinching. She presses for money. He stalls. Regularity slips. That alone makes the source dangerous. Walker's image outruns his income. The bar's gone. The pie front, Counterspy, Inc., is cover, not stability. He needs the Soviet salary to keep the life he's built. Barbara calls the FBI again, now pointing at a son in uniform. No serials, just a story that won't let her sleep. This time it lands on a desk ready to hear it. Inside the house, secrecy becomes the family language. Michael carries pages he doesn't fully grasp. At sea he learns circuits. At home he learns loyalty as obedience. Liberty days become errands that end near parks. Cash slides across a table with approval stapled to it. He's a conduit now, and conduits heat up. Walker stares at two paths: exit or escalate. He knows Moscow doesn't believe in retirements. A quiet source is a risk. He doubles down, more on time, predictable. It keeps cash flowing and nerves steady. Whitworth wavers. The RUS letters, cooperation dangled for immunity, come from fear Walker despises. Jerry's camera feels like contraband. He delays, asks for reassurances Walker can't give. The engine sputters. Walker answers with pressure. Remember what you've done, how far in you are. Whitworth tries to save himself without naming names. More letters, more hints. Analysts debate crank or breadcrumb. The tone isn't a prank. The details sound like a radioman. Not enough for a case, enough to pin a map. Barbara shifts from moral to practical. Michael's involvement. The night drop. Russians, said until it sounds like motive, not paranoia. Agents cross-check travel and cars around Washington. Patterns appear, shadows that hold their shape. Someone with access makes regular runs. Pressure tightens without speeches. Missed drops earn terse notes. Regularity required. Walker makes riskier choices. Heavier bundles, shorter windows. He pushes Michael to move faster, photograph what he can't carry. He tugs Arthur for filler and snaps when he stalls. Ashore, analysts feel Soviet timing they can't source. Procedure memos tighten. Nothing touches the real leak. The trunk, the grocery bag. Walker senses scrutiny and blames Barbara, not Cadence. He floods the zone. Deliver more, precisely, to calm Moscow. Then the moment. Michael comes home with 30 pounds of classified paper under his mattress, fingerprints everywhere. Barbara sees the stash and the cash and watches years of dismissal turn into evidence. She calls again. This time, an agent asks better questions and doesn't let go. Whitworth's letter hits the right desk the same week. Divorce and doubt harmonize. In a windowless room, someone draws a line between an anonymous insider and an ex-wife describing dead drops. It's crooked. It's enough to point surveillance at the man who ran comms and lived sideways. Routine becomes a trap. To calm Moscow, Walker schedules a drop in a Virginia park. To calm his family, he promises it's the last. He believes both. The date goes on a calendar he no longer controls. Agents circle their own. The tipping point isn't a confession, it's a schedule that won't bend. That schedule gives the hunters something they can finally plan against. The hunt begins. FBI and NCIS wake up. The first letter lands with the weight of a whisper. RUS offers cooperation for immunity, hints at Navy communications, gives just enough detail to sound like a man who's handled keys, not headlines. It's vague, self-protective, and easy to shelve, until Barbara calls again and repeats a story that now sounds less like bitterness and more like tradecraft. A night drive. A bag by a tree. Russians. Two thin threads start to look like one rope. At FBI Norfolk, a small counterintelligence squad pulls the file that went nowhere years earlier. They don't dismiss the ex-wife this time. They send a team to sit at her kitchen table without the smirk. What did the bag look like? Where? When? Who else knew? Barbara doesn't have dates, but she has rhythms. Late nights, Washington runs, sudden cash, a son with 30 pounds of classified paper under a mattress. Names surface: John, Michael, a friend he bragged about from the tender. Meanwhile, NCIS, then NIS, gets a ping. Naval security officers hear the same rumors and do what they can do best: pull logs. Who accessed key material when? Whose signatures show up in odd patterns across commands? It's tedious work, a forensic read of bureaucracy. Names recur. John Walker's access history looks ordinary until you chart it against travel and broadcast spikes. It starts to hum. The RUS letters get a second pass in Washington. A linguist notes phrasing that feels like a Navy radioman, the way priorities are described, the casual familiarity with routing terms without showing off. Counterintelligence supervisors argue over the risk, answer the letter and spook him, or wait for another clue and risk silence. They choose the middle path, quietly prepare, don't engage yet. If this is bait from a hostile service, patience won't cost a source. If it's real, he'll write again. Surveillance begins in small circles. Walker's house, his office, the routes out of Virginia Beach toward Washington. Teams swap out at state lines, keep logs clean, capture license plates at rest stops, note the parks and cul-de-sacs that fit Barbara's map. A mail cover starts on his PO box. Trash pulls begin, careful and early. Rubber bands that smell like newsprint, grocery bags without receipts, scraps of Kodak film, wrappers that don't match a family's vacation. They loop in the Bureau's cryptologic liaison. If this is COMSEC, the evidence won't look like money alone. It'll look like repeated access to key lists, possession of cameras appropriate for microfilm, odd bursts of travel at month-end. An analyst lays transparent sheets on a light table and draws lines between Walker's trips and Soviet diplomatic pouches departing Washington. It's not proof, it's a rhythm. NIS knocks on doors that won't make noise. Former supervisors, COMSEC chiefs, enlisted clerks who remember who cut corners and who lectured others. The picture that comes back isn't of a bumbler. It's of a pro, unflappable, helpful, the guy you call when a broadcast dies. The kind who always had the keys handy. The kind who could bend a two-person rule with a nod. The team spins up what they call pattern analysis of keying material access. It sounds grand. It's men and women at tables with binders, highlighting the serial numbers of key lists issued to units Walker touched. They find anomalies. Material signed out off cycle, distribution logs with his initials during periods when he shouldn't have been on duty, pouches he had a reason to carry because he was the fixer. Each anomaly has a plausible operational excuse. Stack them, they become a map. Then Whitworth twitches the line again. Another RUS note, a little bolder, still evasive. He alludes to key cards and distribution lists, to a ring, to a manager who coordinates. He wants a meeting with immunity. The FBI drafts a response they never send. Instead, they tighten the surveillance net on the man Barbara named and watch for contact patterns that fit a ring, not a loner. Tradecraft meets counter-tradecraft on a Tuesday. Walker drives a familiar path toward northern Virginia. Teams settle into hides near a park with the right angles and the right utility pole. A disguised package is placed first. A sterile bundle, prepped to be retrieved, copied, and replaced without the target knowing. Cameras in trees. A van with blacked-out windows. Agents on foot who look like joggers who don't sweat. Unknown to him, across town, a second team watches a likely KGB cutout site. Spots where cars pause without reason, where a driver's eyes scan too carefully. It's not about catching the foreign agent. It's about seeing if the choreography matches Barbara's story and the RUS. Hints. If he plants a bag and someone else collects, the case jumps from suspicion to structure. Inside the command posts, voices stay calm. The debate is constant. How many are there, and how far does it reach? Do they move now and risk scaring off the friend on the tender? Do they wait and risk losing Walker again? The answer becomes the plan. Schedule an intercept at a dead drop they've mapped, capture the bag before the KGB does, document the act, then let him walk long enough to pull the threads. They pick a date, the one he always prefers, the one Moscow prefers. They set the signal that means he's here. They rehearse the grab. The cameras roll. The bag will be opened on a table under fluorescent lights, and the pages inside will tell them if years of unease were a ghost or a wound. The hunt, finally, has teeth. Now the sting plays out in the open, at a place designed to be forgettable.